Supports. They're not just for keeping your pants up, if you're wearing pants. Hello everyone, Bront, CatHerder here. We're having some fun talking Raid Shadow Legends. I do want to thank Raid for sponsoring this video. I have an amazing link down below. Click it, get a bunch of free champions on top of the fact you're going to get Ezio, and you can get the Cheshire Cat with Kitty Cut as well. It's going to be an amazing start to your Raid journey. Click it, join me, play some Raid, have some fun here on their 7th anniversary. We are here to talk about support champions. Now, one of the things I have found is a common question for a lot of people, and not necessarily people that are normal followers to my channel. I see it on Raid, Reddit a lot. I see it in their Discord a lot. And in fact, I still hear it when I have people streaming, or sometimes when I do a video on building a champion. People are unsure how to build their champions. And I think I've covered some of the other builds before. I'll certainly kind of look into them again, especially if this does well and you guys actually enjoy this. If you want me to talk about building nukers or building other types of champions, that's, I think that's a great thing. But we're going to talk about building supports, particularly because I think supports is a really, really wild and wide field because there's so many different ways you can build supports. Let's talk about building those supports that hold up your account and possibly your pants if you're wearing any. So first of all, I'm going to use the term support loosely. Not every support champion is actually labeled a support champion up here. Some of them are going to be HP, some of them are going to be defense, some of them may even be attack champions. But a support champion is somebody that you're not necessarily building for damage. A support champion is somebody you're building to support the rest of your team. And that means that you are building them to be able to do some other job other than just direct damage in order to help your team get past a particular wave, beat a boss, stay alive, win the rewards, and all that fun stuff. Tagoar here is a good example of a support champion. He's actually labeled support, but his kit reads like a support champion. He throws increased defense on the ally with the lowest current HP. Nice. It's a good way to keep them, just a little bit protected. He does increase speed, a very good support ability, and does a heal. He does also attack all enemies, but reading increased speed and big heal tells me that this attack is probably not going to do a ton of damage. And even if it does, I don't necessarily need to build him for damage because this increased speed and this heal are going to be more important to the survivability of my champions. And then finally, the revives all dead allies with 30% HP. Revivals are definitely a support ability. Also puts a shield on all allies for 2 turns equal to 20% of this champion's max HP. A shield, another way to stay alive, much like healing, is another good support ability. And finally, you've got the decreased damage allies receive when they're below 50% HP by 10%. Well, again, that's a tanky ability. That is a support champion through and through. Now, you could certainly build him out for a little bit of damage, but you look here, he doesn't have any debuffs he needs to land, so we know he doesn't need any accuracy. He also is doing things that are going to help you go faster, so going fast might be particularly helpful. You're going to want to use healing based off of his max HP because he's got 2 different abilities that scale off of his max HP. So you're going to want to focus his max HP up just a little bit. Finally, generally, since you want him to stay alive, you're probably going to want some defense. And here's the fun thing about this. Because he doesn't need accuracy and he's a reviver, oftentimes it doesn't hurt to have resistance on these type of champions. And the reason I say it doesn't hurt is because if you're looking for a champion to not be controlled, debuffed, or in other ways lose turns, also in some cases avoid damage, because that can avoid things like poisons, and that can avoid things like decreased defense, which can make it easier for your champion to be killed, then you may want to stack some resistance. We'll talk about where you balance all of these things a little bit later, but just looking at his kit, he doesn't need accuracy, so you don't need to do accuracy. He's not looking like a damage dealer, so you don't need any crit rate, and you definitely don't need any crit damage. He doesn't actually need a lot of attack. Yes, he does do damage based on attack, but because you're going to want to max out his HP, you're not going to be building a lot of attack, which means he's, again, not going to be doing a lot of damage. So while attack does help him do damage, attack is not a very useful skill for him. So you're pretty much going to avoid attack. You're going to be looking for HP and defense substats if you're looking for those substats. Definitely looking for speed because you want him to go fast, and resistance, possibly an option if you can build enough of it to make use of it. Resistance is certainly more difficult. So that's Tagoar, for example, and that's how I would identify what you would need to build with Tagoar. So we have another champion, Uugo here. She is absolutely amazing. She is a great support unit. She is useful for late game accounts too. So building her is very, very important. And of course, she does label herself as a support, which certainly makes it a little easier to ignore damage on them. Although again, not every support is going to be a non-damage dealer. In fact, I can show you guys an example of somebody who's listed as a support, but is actually a damage dealer a little bit later. But you've got Leech, which is nice. It's a way to heal everybody else. It does have a weird scaling ability on it. And here's one of the things that's kind of important to note with some of these champions too. Since we're not worried about damage with this champion, we're not worried about booking up this A1. Tagoar has a very similar issue as well, where you're not looking to book his A1 up because he's not going to get damage on this stuff. When you're looking for books, book them slowly. Don't just dump every single book into them possible, and until you get every other ability booked, because the other abilities are going to be what make this champion great, whereas you don't need this A1, so save some books on this A1. We get here to the A2, much more important, because this has a 75% chance, bookable to 100, of getting decreased defense, and then a 50% chance, bookable to 75, of placing block buffs. But block buffs also has a 5% increased chance per alive enemy of being placed. As long as there are 4 enemies and you have Sniper, which is a good mastery for her, you're going to have a 100% chance of placing block buffs always with an Uugo. Why is Sniper important? Well, again, that means you can deal with 4 enemies instead of 5 for this block debuffs. And that's important because that's Hydra, where she is a great champion. It also helps you with this Leech. 35% becomes a 40% chance. It's only 5%, but 5% makes a huge difference. It really, really does. It's a 1 in 20 chance. And in a long fight where you could be using this A1 30 times, that means you're talking 2 extra places of leechment, maybe more. So that's very, very important. Cooldowns, nice to have, not always the top priority. In fact, if you are really struggling for books to make champions effective, if you book them down to just level 6 and you don't get this cooldown right away, maybe you don't rush that cooldown. It's nice to have, but for early game, 4-turn cooldown for this ability is still pretty solid, especially if you can build Uugo fairly fast. Finally, Uugo has a removes all heal reduction debuffs and 1 additional debuff from all allies, and then heals them by 20% of this champion's max HP. So now we have an indication that you want max HP on this champion. Does do this weird revive thing. This is so rare that I wouldn't necessarily count on it to ever actually be something that happens. But if you build her fairly tanky, there's always the possibility that this could happen, particularly because they do have this passive when they are the last person alive where they get block damage and increased speed. But you then have to hope you have this ability off of cooldown when that happens. So Uugo revives do happen. In fact, very, very early on when I would manual stuff like Chimera, I relied on this Uugo revive for some of my early Chimera teams. But don't count on this being a thing most of the time. So again, how would you be building an Uugo? Well, Uugo has debuffs, which means we need accuracy. Uugo does have this emergency revive, but again, this emergency revive is so difficult to use, I wouldn't count on it. So resistance, while not a horrible thing for an Uugo, is not really what we're looking for. She's not really built as a damage dealer because, again, you're relying on the max HP for this big heal right here, as well as keeping her alive. So you're not building a lot of attack, so you're probably not going to want to build a lot of crit rate and crit damage either because you're not going to be doing a ton of damage here. Another good indicator of not doing a ton of damage is these base stats right here. This is a fairly low amount of base attack. So even if these multipliers are amazing, you don't get a lot of attack out of an Uugo. So building Uugo with more attack is not only extremely difficult, but not likely to yield really good results. So we're looking for accuracy, We are definitely looking for speed because, of course, we want these things to flip around because you want to use that heal every 4 turns when possible. You want to use this every 4 or 3 turns as possible as well. You certainly would like to get some of those leeches out. So having her with a good amount of speed, very, very critical. And then you're looking for some HP and defense to help keep her alive. And that's a very, very basic build for an Uugo. That will give you decreased defense, which is one of the best ways to cut through wave enemies and one of the best ways to do damage against high-end bosses, because defense is what reduces damage champions take. And when you can decrease the defense by 60%, you can reduce the amount of damage reduction that particular enemy receives by a good chunk, possibly as much as 60%, maybe even more. So that number is huge. Decreased defense is huge, and that is one of the reasons that these decreased defense champions are some of the better support champions in the game. And block buffs, well, I don't think I need to tell you why block buffs is important, but I'll tell you anyway. That's going to prevent people from landing some of these buffs that are really annoying. Anything from unkillable and block damage to continuous heals for bosses that you don't want to have healing, for example, to increase attack so that they don't get a huge 50% bonus to damage that might, kill you, to ally protection, making them much harder to kill. There are so many things that block buffs prevents from happening, particularly in the Hydra. That is how you prevent the poison cloud from showing up, as you put block buffs on, and then they can't put that poison cloud up. Overall, very, very good champion. Again, you're looking for speed, you're looking for accuracy in her case, you're looking for some HP and some defense, and those are going to be your important buffs and debuffs and builds for this kind of champion. Now, one of my favorite epic revivers in the game is Rectordrath. She is just an amazing champion. She can be actually very confusing to build. She is a support, but her kit, the way her kit reads, you might think to build her one way, but you really have to figure out what's important for you before you actually choose to build her out. And that is because she has an A1 where she can put decrease attack at a 50% land rate, possibly 55 if you've got sniper on her. That's nice, but there's a problem with the rest of that with her kit. Here she is putting a bunch of healing up based on her max HP. On top of that, she's put a perfect veil up on everybody if they're fully healed, so you want that max HP heal to be huge. And then she puts continuous heal, a buff on all allies for 1 turn if they are not at the 100%. So you're going to either get a perfect veil or a continuous heal on your champion as well. The perfect veil is important because that veil or perfect veil buff heals them by 10% of their max HP and increases the resistance by 50 points. That is very important because that is one of the ways that Rectordrath becomes one of the best healers in the game. She is constantly healing anyone under veil. And it doesn't even have to be her veil. So veils on top of that, perfect veil reduces the amount of damage you take by 15% from AoE damage as well. And a veil champion cannot be targeted unless everybody is under veil. Otherwise, you cannot target any particular veiled champion over an unveiled champion. Finally, she does have a revive here. So 60% HP, fills her turn meter by 60%, a very good single target on a 4-turn cooldown, and puts a perfect veil buff on them for 3 turns, meaning they can't be targeted by some single target attacks, and they have damage reduction on an AoE as well, so very, very survivable with that revive. When we're looking at a champion, you're definitely going to want her to be fast because you want to get those heals out regularly, and you're not going to be waiting on a revive if you need that revive. You're going to want some HP because, well, she's healing people based off of her max HP right here. So max HP is going to be huge on her. You probably want a little bit of defense because honestly, you want her to be a little bit tanky because if she's not tanky, she's just going to die anyway. So that defense really can cut down on the damage she takes. Yeah, so you're not going to be building a lot of attack, even if especially because this is the only thing that she does to do any damage at all. So it is very clear she is not a damage dealer. Do not build attack on her. But on top of that, you might look at her and say, maybe I should build some accuracy on her. And the answer is probably not, at least early on. The reason I say this is the opportunity cost of building her tankier versus building her with a little bit of accuracy can be too much on an early account. Now, to be fair, you don't need a lot of accuracy on an earlier account to make her effective. And if you can get them because you happen to have a couple of accuracy substats or you actually put her in a set that gives her some accuracy, then that's fine. It's not a bad thing to have the accuracy. But you don't want to put an accuracy chest on her because that HP is more important for her. And on top of that, it's still only a 35 bookable to 50% chance of placing that decreased defense. Now, this is also going to depend a little bit on where you're using her. If you're going to be using her in a clan boss team, for example, and she's your only decreased attack champion, then yeah, you're probably going to want that accuracy just because you want that chance of getting that decreased attack. And to be fair, every 2 turns, she should be doing this. Maybe every 3 turns, she should be doing this. So she will have a decent amount of times to place this decreased attack. But outside of very specific scenarios like that, or once you can build a champion to be fairly tanky and not sacrifice much for that extra accuracy, she's actually a champion you probably don't need a ton of accuracy on. There's a lot of epic revivers that look like they could use accuracy because they have some ability to place a debuff on their A1. But because they're often not using their A1 as a high priority, combined with the fact that there's often not only a low percentage chance to land, but that debuff is often not exactly the most exciting debuff in the game. Although to be fair, decreased attack is actually pretty solid. It's not like a 10% chance to stun, for example, that I know that there's at least one support champion that has. It's bookable to 20%, I believe, but on an A1, I'll give up accuracy to not have that 20% chance to stun and build them to be a much better support by building more defense and building more HP so they stay alive and are able to do their job. Now, I do just want to point out, not every support is going to be pure support and can do some damage. Seer is listed as a support because her kit is supposed to be giving you the increased crit rate and the weaken, as well as the sleep and the removal of buffs. But because of the way this scales off of enemy max HP plus the removal of buffs, this is an absolute unit of a nuke. This can wipe waves out with endgame gear, and honestly, even not so endgame gear, she can be a good wave removal and damage dealer on your team. So this is an example of where somebody, if you read their kit, you can say, ooh, enemy max HP damage that scales off of something else she does. She needs to be built as a damage dealer. So look at the kits, read the kits, and think about where they might be used. Archmage Helmet is another support, and he's a weird one, so we're going to talk about him because he is also a guaranteed champion. You will get him within the first 6 to 9 months of your account. Because if you're doing Doom Tower, which you should, and if you're doing those secret rooms, you should be able to knock out enough of those secret rooms within 6 to 9 months to be able to get your Archmage Helmet. And from there, you can start to get some of the other epics. Not all of the epics in Doom Tower are great, but the first couple are actually pretty solid, Archmage being one of my favorites. Archmage needs to critical, however. Fills his champion by 10% if turn meter, gives him 20% if this attack is critical. This attacks one enemy, also attacks all other enemies if the first attack is critical. So you need critical hit or crit rate to make this champion work. You're also going to need, well, if you want to be able to take advantage of the stun here and the decreased turn meter for everybody that was not stunned, that is going to require some accuracy. So you're going to need accuracy to be able to land this particular ability. And this is a good control from an epic. Finally, he's got 3 good buffs. Well, 2 good buffs and increased crit rate. But he's got 3 buffs. Increased speed, always a great ability. Increased crit damage is a great way to increase the damage of everybody on your team. It's on a 3-turn cooldown, and triple buffs can be great. So looking at him, and finally he's immune to turn meter reduction, so that's fine. He doesn't really need a lot of resistance because he's not a healer or not a support champion that you need to make sure that he's staying alive. He is going to be critting, and he does some okay-ish damage, so building him for a bit of damage doesn't hurt. Now, this is attack-based damage, and his attack is kind of low, so, but that said, that means that maybe a crit damage amulet might be kind of interesting for you, rather than just a normal attack or HP or whatever amulet. And particularly since he is critting, that crit damage amulet's going to go a lot further for damage than an attack-based amulet anyway. But we were talking about different sets. He puts 3 buffs up. So you can, instead of building him for like pure damage, maybe building him with some ignore defense or not, you could build him in protection, for example, and use this to be more of a support ability to give him bonus damage to everyone else, because with a 9-piece protection set, you get a bunch of bonus damage. Otherwise, this stun, very useful. The fact that you critical gave you some extra turn meter on him, so he just goes faster is great. You want these buffs up constantly. You ideally want to get this off as often as possible, and you definitely are going to want to book this. He doesn't really need books in that A1, although if you're building him for damage books in the A1 don't suck horribly, but I'd probably save the books if you didn't need them. He's got a decent base speed, decent defense, decent HP. You can build him a little bit tanky. You can build him for a little bit of damage, and you can either build him in like protection to help everybody get some pretty good buffs, or maybe you build him just for some flat out damage so that he helps smack in addition to controlling the other team and just giving himself some more turn meter. Definitely going to want some speed on him though as well, and you're definitely going to need accuracy if you're going to want to use this ability. One of my favorite supports here, who's not listed as a support but a defense-based champion, is Scylla the Drakes. I think she's a great champion. I think you get her at a good time. I certainly think it'd be nice to get her a little earlier, the way the game is sped up a bit. She is definitely worth building on honestly any account, because she is such a hard carry for barbarians that I still use her in my barbarian team today for Faction Wars 21 hard on my main. So good champion, worth building, and she's got a fun kit that does need some books eventually, but this decreased speed, well, that's a debuff. She also has turn meter decrease. Not a huge chance here. So if you're building a very early Scylla the Drakes, maybe you don't build a lot of accuracy on her because maybe you want her to stay alive a little bit. Now, she does do damage based on defense, but don't let that fool you. You want her to be tanky, which means you do not want to ignore HP for only defense, because at some point in time, your defense stops scaling up the damage reduction very quickly, but your HP is always more HP. So if you have a high defense and high HP, you effectively have more tankability and more tankiness, or effective HP as it's often called, than you would be if you have a super high defense but a low HP. Scylla also, however, does have this AoE stun. So again, another reason accuracy may actually be good on her. But early on, a lot of you are using her for this passive ability to just heal everybody and put that increased speed up as well. This heal is actually pretty huge. This is a reason that you put her in something like a Relentless set, because you want her to take multiple turns in a row. And then she's got a decent-ish revive. It's not the greatest revive. 4-turn cooldown, single target, 50% HP and ally protection to help keep somebody alive. But again, you want her tanky, you want her fairly fast, and then accuracy becomes a luxury that you eventually are going to want on this champion, because you're going to want to make the use of this 35% chance to land a stun per hit. That's actually about a 50% chance to actually land it with that 35% chance per hit. That's a very effective and somewhat reliable AoE stun on a champion who's also going to keep you alive and revive you if you actually do die, let alone the fact that turn meter control and decreased speed, a good way to control the other end of the wave. She brings a ton of control in addition to that healing, so this is where reading the kit makes you understand what type of champion she is. She can do some okay damage, but she's not a great damage dealer. I would much rather build her with extra HP and extra defense. So very early on in the game, stats are going to be more important than set. And that is important to note because you're looking to get your 200-ish speed early on. You're looking to get, more than 50k HP. You're looking to get to that 3000 defense for a lot of these supports. Those are numbers that are helpful. Honestly, your defense number caps out around 4,200. Over 4,200 is where you start to see a decline in how much you get. It might actually not be exactly 4,200, but regardless, 4,200 is when you start to see a decline in how much extra damage reduction you get from defense. But you're going to want to get a high defense, close to that number if you can on a lot of these support champions. You're going to want to get high HP. I'd say 50,000 early on. Later on, you're looking for 80k, 100k HP. So this is going to scale up with bigger and better champions. And then on top of that, you're looking for high speed. I say 200 is kind of a target speed. For early game content, there's the rule of 200. You are generally looking for all of your champions to be near 200 speed, and you are generally looking for your support champions to be faster than your damage dealers so that they can land the debuffs or buffs they need to before you can then nuke everybody and move on to the next wave. Because if you can set up your damage dealer to have an increased damage stat, in addition to have decreased defense out there, maybe even a weaken out there, right before they land that nuke, then you're good to go. And if they don't kill everybody, then having something like that perfect veil on that champion to keep them alive a little bit longer, or have some of that healing stuff up so they can take some damage and still be healed, or having a block debuffs so they can't be debuffed. Those are the type of things that are going to be helpful for your champions. So building them sort of in that speed order and building them over 200 speed is going to get you through a lot of content. You're also looking for 250 accuracy early on. That's going to be up through dungeon level 25. You're looking for 350 resistance, which is why when I mention resistance, keep in mind how much resistance you need. It's about 100 more than the needed accuracy on any given level to be effective. But we're talking sets. So what sets are you kind of looking for your supports? Well, again, you want your supports to be going fast. If it's a speed booster champion like a High Katoon, for example, of an Arbiter, you really want all the speed you can get. So speed set's going to be absolutely amazing. You're looking for a tanky champion. Regeneration might be a really good set for them because you want them to stay alive longer. Shield gives you a chance to be able to take a few hits early on. Not a bad set to have. Bolster is certainly a better set because Bolster gives you not only that initial shield, but also some regeneration. But of course, that is a paid set, so very few people are going to have a lot of pieces for it if they're not spending money. But that said, if the Bolster set ever does become available, just regularly or when that particular Forge Pass comes around, you're going to want to try to max that out as a free-to-play player just to get your hands on a little bit of Bolster, because maybe you might be able to make 1 or 2 sets over the course of a year or two. Do the champions want to take a lot of turns, like a Syl the Drake or a Doom Priest, for example? Relentless becomes very, very good. Some speed boosters actually work well in Relentless as well, such as like a Necmo Thar or a Noella, where this Relentless set is going to help them boost your turn meter even more and get some other fun stuff out there as well. Savage. Well, Savage is a damage dealing set, so you're probably not going to put that on your support. Stun, however, not a bad set to put on champions that have big AoE attacks. Some of these support champions actually also have an AoE A1 or a good AoE A2 on a reasonable cooldown. So stun set is not the worst thing you could put on some of them. Same with like the provoke set, for example, if you're going to build them for a Hydra champion. Having them have a chance of putting that provoke out there could be helpful for you, so provoke set could be very, very interesting. Even cursed set could be interesting if they're doing a bunch of AoEs on some of these support champions as well. I really like Necmo Thar in a provoke set. Krisk is a great support champion, and cursed is one of the better builds for him in Hydra because he gets that hex out in addition to everything else Krisk does as well. If they have specific skills that you want to make sure are reset, Reflex is a great set for that. Reflex is going to be very, very helpful in getting cooldowns reduced. Can be useful for damage dealers as well, but that's going to help for champions that you really want to make sure that they are doing their support ability as often as possible. Immortal, another regeneration healing set, not bad. Divine Speed's effectively seed. Deflection, the new buff for deflection is going to mean that that's going to be an accuracy and speed set. So deflection could be a very good set for some of your debuffers, for some of your support champions, and plus the bonus chance of being able to reflect the debuffs, it's going to go up to 35% chance with the boost. Well, that means that it might actually be a good set to put on some of your supports to help keep them alive and throw some debuffs back on your attackers just in case. I mean, that could be easily anything from a stun gets thrown back, because it is 1 debuff, to throwing back a poison that they wouldn't have taken otherwise, so they're less likely to die, or throwing back that decreased defense. You know, that's the type of thing deflection could do for you with some extra speed and accuracy, going to be good for some of your debuffers. Perception gives you accuracy and speed, a good set to be building some of your support champions around, especially if they need speed and accuracy. Got some tanky champions. I wouldn't necessarily recommend Guardian for revivers, but for other healers or other tanky support champions, Guardian's a good set because that gives you basically a 10% ally protection from every attack on a particularly tanky champion. The reason I don't like it on revivers is you do get some extra healing out of it, which is nice, but if the reviver is taking some of this extra damage, it could wear them down enough to where they die first. And the idea of this is to have somebody that's not your reviver die and take some of the damage, particularly somebody who is capable of taking it. But what they can actually heal as well, Guardian can be a good set. That said, Late game regeneration tends to be better, and bolster is straight up better than Guardian in most cases, at least for short fights. Is your champion a buffer? Well, protection is great. Protection, particularly with a 9-piece set, gives you bonus damage per buff placed by the wearer. They don't even have to be protected buffs. I know some people seem to think that these buffs have to be protected, but it's literally just buffs placed by the wearer. They do not have to be protected to get this extra 5%. So very, very good ability, very, very good set overall. Gives you a bunch of speed, gives you some resistance and some HP as well. Overall, a very good set for a lot of support champions. Stone Skin, another good one for some support champions, because not only is it going to give you some extra HP, resistance, and defense, but Stone Skin's a great way to survive at least through the first round to get a chance to do something. Stone Skin is one of the best sets in the game for PvP, although that's certainly changing with the introduction of Mercurial, which, to be fair, I would treat very similar to a Stone Skin set, other than a 9-piece Mercurial set is a lot better than a 9-piece Stone set, because you constantly generate those true guards that are very, very annoying. Finally, Supersonic 4-piece is actually a pretty solid option for a lot of debuffers, particularly in the arena where buffing is a big common thing. This turn meter by 2% for each buff on each enemy. Well, if an enemy gets 2 buffs each and they have 4 enemies, that is a 16% turn meter fill with the Supersonic on that champion. That is actually pretty nice, and that can have somebody jump up in line to be able to interrupt something else. So support champions in Supersonic can be great, but keep in mind Supersonic is probably more of an arena set than it is a PvE set. So we talked about the stats that are important and some of the sets that are really good on these supports, but what about the individual pieces? Well, you're going to want speed boots, pretty much flat speed boots. There's no reason to put non-speed boots on most support champions unless they very specifically do not need all the speed and they do need all the tankiness. A good example of that is a Sand Devil Godseeker, who, if you can build her with that 200-ish speed, depending on which build you're using, you do not need speed boots, and that HP boots or defense boots may make her more survivable to be able to actually run that duo team. So that's an example of not necessarily needing speed boots, but in most cases, you want your supports to go as fast as possible, which means you're going to want speed boots. You're really going to want speed ascensions here, although HP percent ascensions and defense percent ascensions, those are going to be useful, but probably not quite as useful as speed, because speed is really going to be amazing, especially for end game and late game stuff. As you can see, my Elva is 280 speed on my free-to-play account. I would certainly not mind if she got faster, but she is so fast because that is a very effective speed for her for a lot of the content I am currently doing. As far as the chest and the gloves, I like to have one of them be HP percent and one of them be defense percent. You're definitely going to want speed substats on either or both of these whenever possible. And then if you want resistance, look for resistance subs on here. If you want accuracy, look for accuracy subs. Here's the thing. If for some reason you cannot get enough resistance or accuracy, you may need to go with a resistance or accuracy chest. But before you do that, go for a resistance or accuracy banner, because you don't lose out as much stats going for resistance or accuracy on the banner as you do on the chest, because this 60% defense is going to be much more effective than the maximum defense on a banner, especially a 5% banner in this particular case here. So be aware of that. Also be aware of which sets you're using where. Like you see, she's got 2-piece Chronophage because that gives me 10% extra speed and 20% extra resistance. In that case, that actually means that this piece is worth more resistance than it might have been if it was a 6-star Chronophage set. Now, it's not perfect, especially once I ascend this, if I need to get some of that resistance up even further. So I'm eventually going to want to get a 6-star resistance piece on her. Having Chronophage gives me some extra stats. That's part of why these 9-piece sets can be very, very good. You can pick and choose what stat boost you're going to get. You know, for example, looking at Stone Skin over here, Stone Skin's going to give me some extra HP just for that one piece. That seems like a bit of a no-brainer if I happen to have a particularly good Stone Skin, even if I'm not building Stone Skin on some of these champions. Your ring, generally going to be defense or HP. You're going to want HP and defense substats, particularly percentages, obviously, with the ring. And this is a decent-ish ring for Elva. Could it be better? maybe. It could be a 6-star. Maybe HP might be a little more viable. But overall, I mean, you look at her stats here, I could certainly still get a little more defense on her and not be unhappy. I've got a decent amount of HP on her, but I certainly could use some more. But this build got me in protection, got me plenty of speed, and got me some resistance. If I didn't need this resistance, I probably could have another 500 to 1,000 defense and another 10k HP easily. So it's one of the sacrifices you make for going for resistance. And finally, I actually have a crit damage amulet on her because I want her in my Chimera team to not be the lowest crit damage, because I don't want her to be attacked by the ram form and die, because she is my reviver in that particular team. Now, it turns out it's not quite as bad as it used to be, because I now have 2 revivers in my team currently, but when she was the only one, that was an important thing I needed. That might be something that might be different from the normal advice I'm giving here. You're going to have to figure out where you're using these champions and sometimes tweak their builds slightly to fit in the teams you're using. But otherwise, we're looking for HP or defense here, and you're looking for defense or HP as a substat here. Accuracy and resistance, nice to have. Attack, probably the least useful thing on this particular one, but again, otherwise it would have been crit damage or HP. In this particular case, HP would have been better than attack, but if you're using an attack or defense one, you're going to end up with crit damage or attack as one of the main substats here on your piece regardless. So for the most part, if you get your accuracy, your defense or HP and resistance as the other ones here, you're good to go regardless of what support build you're using. So there you go, guys. That is how to build supports. I've covered quite a bit of different types of supports. I've talked about quite a different types of builds. If you're still confused, I get it. Supports is such a broad topic for this game because there's so many different types of supports. There's debuffers, there's supports that also bring some damage, there's revivers, there's healers, there's cleansers, there's all kinds of things that you can use as support. Heck, there's ally attackers, which are another form of support. You kind of need to figure out what you want to do with them, what stats are going to be important on them, and I've kind of highlighted some of the best. You're generally going to want these supports to be tanky because you want them to survive. You want them to be fast because you want them to do their abilities pretty often. And overall, those two things are going to be the driving force. And from there, you want to make sure that they have the stats to enable the other things they do. If that means you need to build crit rate on one of them, then build crit rate on that one. If you need enough accuracy, build that accuracy. If resistance is going to keep that champion functioning better than normal, then maybe it's a good champion to build for resistance. So those are important things to consider when building your supports. So hopefully this helped quite a bit. Hopefully this at least gives you some good ideas on what to do to build those supports, what I find important in them. But you know what? Let me know down below. Is there anything you think I missed? Is there some important information about supports you think I missed that I should have covered? Or maybe you just want to make sure that there's some new player out there that doesn't know some of this stuff, can learn how to build supports better. I really do appreciate you guys in the comments. You are absolutely amazing. Very, very supportive. It's one of the best communities in gaming, and I think I have one of the best communities in Raid Shadow Legends. You guys are absolutely amazing for all the support. Much love, everyone. I'd appreciate it if you could hit that like button and hit that subscribe button while you're down there in the comment section as well. It really does help the channel grow, shows your support, and helps make sure that people are seeing these videos as well. So until the next video, I am Bront, CatHerder.